The notification came in at 6:37 on a Tuesday morning while I was still in bed, still half asleep, still wearing the oversized Penn State hoodie I'd had since sophomore year. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it without thinking. It was my brother. "Mom says you're buying a house. Why didn't you tell us? We need to talk. Call me." I set the phone face down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I knew that text wasn't really a question. It was the starting gun. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. And the context is basically my entire adult life. I'm 31. I'm a software engineer at a mid-sized logistics company in Austin, Texas. I've been there for 6 years. I've been promoted 3 times, and I make good money. Not tech startup IPO money, but solid, stable, I can actually plan my future money. I got here by being careful. I got here by being boring on purpose. When I was 24 and fresh out of college, I made a budget on a spreadsheet and I stuck to it like it was scripture. I cooked at home. I bought my clothes from the clearance rack. I drove the same Honda Civic for 9 years and only replaced it last spring when the transmission finally gave out. While my coworkers were booking Airbnbs in Tulum and buying mirror-tiled furniture from Instagram ads, I was putting 15% of every paycheck into a high-yield savings account and pretending I didn't see the numbers slowly, steadily climbing. I want you to understand that I was not living a sad life. I had friends. I had a good apartment. I had a life I liked. I was just also very, very intentional about what I was building toward. My brother, on the other hand, my brother has always had a different philosophy. His name is Theo. He's 28, 3 years younger than me, and he has 3 children under the age of 6 with his wife, Brianna. He works at a car dealership, not selling cars, but doing something in the back office I've never fully understood. Brianna doesn't work. That's not a judgment. Or at least I'm trying not to make it one, but it is a fact that matters for what comes next. Theo has always been the one my parents worried about. Not in the way parents worry about a kid who's struggling, more in the way they worry about a fragile thing they're convinced will shatter if anyone breathes too hard near it. He was babied. He was excused. When he got Brianna pregnant at 24, before they were married, before they had any real savings, my mother sat me down and told me we needed to be supportive. I agreed. I sent them a check to cover the hospital bills they couldn't afford. That was the first one. There were others after that. Never huge amounts, never anything I couldn't technically afford. But they added up, and more than the money, what added up was the expectation, this quiet, unspoken understanding that I was the one in the family with resources and resources existed to be distributed. My father would say things like, "You're so good with money, sweetheart. Not everyone has that gift." And it sounded like a compliment, but what it really meant was, "You have it, they don't, so you should give it to them." As if my savings account were a talent I'd been born with rather than years of choices I'd made. I never said anything. That's on me. I know that. I just kept writing the checks and nodding at the dinners and telling myself it was fine. It was family. This is what you do. What I was doing underneath all of that was saving for a house. I had been saving for 7 years. 7 years of spreadsheets and packed lunches and turning down the group trip to Costa Rica and watching the number in my account grow from a wish into something real. By the time I was 31, I had a down payment that made my mortgage broker actually smile when I sent over my documents. I was pre-approved within 48 hours. I didn't tell my family I was looking. I know how that sounds, secretive, maybe even calculated. But I want to be honest, I wasn't hiding it to be sneaky. I was keeping it private because I knew what would happen if I told them. I'd seen what happened every other time I mentioned anything good happening in my life. It got absorbed. It became a family project. It stopped being mine. I found the house in March. It was a 3-bedroom Craftsman in a quiet neighborhood about 12 minutes from my office. Hardwood floors, a big kitchen window that looked out over a backyard with 2 old oak trees, a breakfast nook I already had plans for. It was not a mansion. It was a house. My house. The one I had been building toward for 7 years. I made an offer. They countered. We settled. I signed the purchase agreement on a Wednesday afternoon sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, and I cried a little, just quietly, by myself because I had done it. I had actually done it. I had actually done it. I told my mother that evening, Not to share the moment, or maybe a little to share the moment, but mostly because I knew she'd find out eventually and I'd rather tell her myself. That was my mistake. Not the house. Telling her. She was quiet for a second after I said it. Then, "Oh, how many bedrooms?" "3, I said. Another pause. "Theo's apartment lease is up in June." I didn't respond right away. I was waiting to see if she'd finish the thought, if she'd actually say out loud what she was implying. But she just let it sit there between us, this enormous, suffocating implication. "Mom," I said finally, "I'm buying a house for me to live in." "I know that, honey. I'm just saying. 3 bedrooms is a lot of space for one person. I have a home office and a guest room." A guest room could be Theo and Brianna's room. I remember looking out my apartment window at the streetlights coming on and thinking, here we go. The next morning was when Theo texted me. And then my father called. And then my mother called again. And then somehow, within 48 hours of me mentioning a 3-bedroom house in Austin, my family had collectively decided that this was a family asset, a solution to a problem I had not been consulted about solving. The plan, as it was presented to me over a series of increasingly aggressive phone calls, was this. I would buy a larger house, preferably 4 bedrooms, ideally with a finished basement in a neighborhood closer to where my parents lived, 40 minutes north of where I'd already agreed to buy. And Theo and Brianna and the 3 kids would move in. We would split the mortgage, they said, though when I pressed on what split meant, the number they offered was so small, I actually laughed out loud. "This is what families do," my mother said. "They take care of each other." "I am taking care of myself," I said. "That's what I've been doing for 7 years. You don't have children, you don't have a husband, you have space to be generous." I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because I've thought about it a lot since then. You don't have children. You don't have a husband. As if the fact that I had built a stable, intentional life on my own terms was somehow a surplus, an excess of resources that rightfully belonged to the people who had made different choices. As if being single and childless by choice meant I owed my margin to someone else's instability. I didn't say any of that on the phone. I said, "I'll think about it," which was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that buys you peace for a few days, and I needed those days. Here's what actually happened in those days. I called my mortgage broker. I confirmed my purchase agreement was solid. I scheduled my inspection. I did everything I was supposed to do on the house I had already chosen, in the neighborhood I had already chosen, for the life I was already building. And I didn't tell my family any of it. Theo called me 4 times in 1 week. The calls started okay, casual, almost friendly, like he was trying to ease into it. By the 3rd one, he was frustrated. By the 4th, he said, "You know what your problem is? You've always acted like you're better than us." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. I don't think I'm better than my family. I think I made different choices, and those choices led to different outcomes, and somewhere along the way, my family decided that the outcome gap was my responsibility to close. That's not me being better than anyone. That's me being made to feel guilty for a life I built one boring, deliberate, spreadsheet-backed decision at a time. My mother tried a different approach. She started talking about the grandchildren. She described in real detail how hard it was for Theo and Brianna with 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. She talked about how the kids were sharing a room, how there was no yard, how the oldest had started acting out at school. All of this was probably true. None of it was my fault, or my responsibility to fix. "Think about what it would mean to those babies," she said. "To have a yard, to have space, to have their aunt nearby." "They have parents," I said. "Their parents should provide that." "Theo is trying. Trying isn't enough when you have 3 children, Mom." The silence after that was long and cold. I closed on the house on a Friday in April. I signed the papers at the title company at 2 in the afternoon, and by 4 I had the keys in my hand and I was standing in my empty kitchen looking at that big window over the backyard, the 2 oak trees casting long shadows across the grass, and I thought, this is mine. Just mine. Entirely, unconditionally, finally mine. I told no one in my family that day. I told my best friend Petra, who screamed into the phone and then drove over with a bottle of Prosecco we drank sitting on the floor, because I had no furniture yet. It was one of the best evenings of my life. I spent the next 3 weeks moving in slowly, furnishing carefully, making every decision alone and exactly the way I wanted it. I bought a dining table that seats 4 because that is the number of people I intend to have at dinner. I put a reading chair in the third bedroom instead of a bed because that room is an office and a library and a place for me. I planted tomatoes along the back fence because I wanted to. I was happy in a way that felt new. Not the relieved, carefully managed happy of someone who has been holding their breath for a long time, but something quieter and more solid than that. I was just good. I hadn't spoken to my mother in about 2 weeks when she showed up at my door. She brought my father. She brought Theo and Brianna. She brought all 3 kids. I opened the door and just stood there looking at them for a moment, all 6 of them arranged on my porch like a delegation, and I felt something move through me that was not quite anger. It was more like a sudden, total clarity. "We wanted to see the place," my mother said. She was already looking past me into the hallway. "Oh. It's smaller than I expected." "It's a 3-bedroom craftsman," I said. "I described it to you. Where do the kids sleep when they visit? There's a guest room. 1 room for 3 children? People manage." My father was looking at the backyard through the kitchen window. Theo had his arms crossed, scanning the living room with an expression I can only describe as assessing. Like he was calculating square footage, running numbers on what could fit where. Brianna was quieter than usual. She sat down on my couch without being invited and pulled out her phone. The kids ran to the backyard immediately, and I let them because it was the path of least resistance, and also because I genuinely like my nieces and nephew even when their existence is being used as leverage against me. My mother sat at my 4-person dining table and folded her hands. "This house could work," she said finally. "It works great," I said. "For me." "With a pullout in the living room?" "There will not be a pullout in the living room." "Sweetheart, Mom." I sat down across from her. I was careful to keep my voice even. "I know what you came here to do, and I need you to hear me when I say this. I bought this house for myself. This is my home. It is not a family housing solution. It is not a place for Theo and Brianna and the kids to move into. It is mine." My father turned away from the window. Theo uncrossed his arms. My mother's expression went through several changes: hurt, then indignation, then something harder. "You would really turn your back on your own brother," she said. "I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm living in my own house. He has 3 children. Yes, and he is their father. That is his responsibility. You don't understand what it's like to what?" I said. "To struggle? I understand exactly what it's like. I struggled quietly for 7 years to build something that was mine. The difference is no one was handing me a solution." Theo spoke for the first time. "It's not like we're asking you to give us anything. We'd pay rent. The number you quoted me would cover about 1/3 of my mortgage. That's still something." "Theo." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and I tried to say what I was about to say without cruelty. "You have 3 kids and you and Brianna are the only ones responsible for housing them. I love your kids. I will be their aunt. But I cannot be their solution. That's not fair to any of us, including them." Brianna looked up from her phone at that. Something shifted in her face. I don't know what she was thinking. I never have. My mother stood up. She said, "I didn't raise you to be like this." "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "I am." They left. The kids had to be called in from the backyard. My oldest niece hugged me around the waist on her way out. I hugged her back. I stood on the porch and watched them get into Theo's minivan and pull away, and then I went inside and closed the door and stood in the middle of my kitchen for a long time. I won't pretend that was easy. I won't pretend that felt purely good about it. There was grief in there, a little grief for the version of this where my family cheered for me, or my mother came to see the house because she was happy for me, or my brother said congratulations and meant it. That family exists somewhere, I think, in some parallel configuration, and I feel the distance from it sometimes. But I also felt something else. Standing in that kitchen, with the afternoon light coming through the big window, the oak trees in the yard, the tomato plants I'd put in myself along the back fence, I felt like a person who had made a decision and lived inside it. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. My mother called twice that evening. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that I've listened to once and won't describe in detail except to say that the word selfish appeared more than once and she mentioned God in a way that felt strategic. I texted her the next morning. I said, "I love you and I love this family. I will always show up for you in the ways I'm able to. But I made a decision about my own home and it's not going to change. When you're ready to talk without pressure, I'm here." She didn't respond for 4 days. When she did, it was short. Fine. Just that one word, which from my mother is approximately a white flag. Theo and I haven't talked since that day. That one I'm still sitting with. I don't know where it ends. I hope it ends somewhere better than where it is right now, but I'm not going to manufacture reconciliation just to ease my own discomfort. He'll either come around or he won't. What I know is this. I sit at my 4-person dining table most mornings with coffee and my laptop, and the light comes in through the kitchen window, and the oak trees are doing whatever oak trees do in spring, which is apparently grow leaves with a kind of enthusiasm that is genuinely moving. I planted more tomatoes. I have a reading chair. I have a neighborhood I'm getting to know slowly, a coffee shop 3 blocks away where they've started to recognize me, a life that is entirely, completely, finally just the shape I chose for it. I built this. Every boring choice, every skipped trip, every spreadsheet, every no thank you, and not this time. And I'm saving for something. They were all pointing here. To this kitchen, this window, these trees, my house, my rules, my life. I don't think that makes me selfish. I think that makes me someone who finally stopped waiting for permission to keep what she earned. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, the way you do when something big settles and you finally have enough distance to look at it clearly. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened was an accident. Not the entitlement, not the pressure, not the way my family showed up at my door, assuming they already lived there. All of it was the result of a long chain of small decisions, mine included. Every time I wrote a check without being asked. Every time I said, "I'll think about it," when I meant no. Every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I was teaching people how to treat me. That's not blame. That's just how it works. The dynamic my family had with me didn't appear out of nowhere. I helped build it one soft yes at a time, and eventually it grew into something I had to dismantle with both hands. That's the part no one tells you about setting a boundary late. It always feels like the aggressive move, even when it's just correction. My mother used the word selfish, like it was an accusation, but what she was really reacting to was the fact that I had changed the rules of a game she'd gotten very comfortable winning. That discomfort was real. I'm not dismissing it, but discomfort is not the same as injustice, and I had to be clear with myself about that distinction or I would have folded. What I learned, what I genuinely believe now, is that integrity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the accumulation of decisions you make when no one is watching and nothing is easy. 7 years of packed lunches and turned down trips and spreadsheets nobody ever thanked me for. That was integrity. It didn't feel noble at the time. It just felt like Tuesday, but it built something real, and when the moment came to defend it, I had something solid to stand on. I think about Theo sometimes and I don't feel anger anymore, mostly just something tired and a little sad. He's not a villain. He's a person who was never asked to develop the muscles that responsibility requires, and now he's carrying weight those muscles aren't built for. That's its own consequence, and it has nothing to do with me fixing it. Loving someone doesn't mean absorbing the fallout of every choice they've made. That took me a long time to understand without guilt. The thing about intelligence, real intelligence, the practical kind, is that it includes knowing what is and isn't yours to solve. I'm good at my job. I'm good with money. But neither of those things obligates me to become the structural support for an entire family that has its own capable adults in it. Knowing that and holding it even when people are crying and invoking family and God in the same sentence is a kind of wisdom I had to earn the hard way. I'm still earning it, honestly. Some mornings I sit with my coffee and wonder if I could have handled it differently, earlier, more gently. Maybe. But I also know that the version of me who signed those closing papers and planted those tomatoes and stood at her own front door and said, "This is mine," that version took a long time to show up. I'm not sending her away.